Today is on Crew Leader 101. So we've already covered a few prior trainings. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to cover the essential skills for crew leaders and understanding cost impact on a company's profitability for crew leaders. So again, as I've said before, this is a lot of the training I do. Normally, if I do this live with companies with their crew leaders, this is a full day's training, or online version, self-paced, probably be 8 to 10 hours. So we condense this down to give you some of the most important areas to take away today. So frontline managers are one of the most invaluable resources, right? Your frontline managers are crucial to helping your employees succeed and fostering your company's growth. You've trusted them enough to run your crews, so we want to make sure you empower them to achieve success. So whether you're watching this today as a crew leader or want to be crew leader, or if you're in a management or ownership position of your company, you'll be able to get the takeaways. And this would be a great recording to share with your crew leaders, whether they've been doing it for years or not. So crew leaders, who are they? So we've already done a couple, right? We covered the project managers on a prior training, and we covered superintendents. So today we're going to focus mainly, well, not mainly, strictly on crew leaders, which is also known as foremen. I prefer crew leader for the simple fact that you're leading a crew. You're not really running or managing anymore. You have to be a leader. So crew leader kind of puts it on a level playing field with the skills and where you need to be to do this. So the leadership pyramid, again, upside down, take a look at it. This is really where it comes out. Your crew leader is at the bottom, which means they got the most responsibility out there as far as the job goes. They really do. They're responsible for day to day, and we're going to come into that. Then the superintendent falls next in line, if you have that in your structure, and then finally the project manager responsibility. So leadership keys, right? So each position, as we've gone over, shares specific skills, but each overall skill set. So I just want to kind of review them a little bit. So foreman, again, we're calling crew leader here. They directly manage the crew and is responsible for that day-to-day operational success of their project, which is your project. Your superintendent, that's a person that oversees multiple crews, crew leaders, 4 persons on multiple projects. And then finally, you have your project manager, which is responsible for all aspects of people project success. As I said, we've covered more in depth in the superintendent project management. So today we're going to stick with that crew leader. So must-have skills. So there are certain skills that all 3 of these positions do share, right? It has to be. And that's a good thing. And really what it is this, crucial soft skills for any of these supervisors, and right at your crew level, communication. 87% of your workplace failures come from poor or lack of communication, whether it's misinformation or just not getting the information or not communicating at all. You can eliminate 87% of your problems and your job issues by having good communication as a crew leader. Conflict resolution. You're going to have the ability to manage conflict well when all issues come, allows for successful resolutions, right? It's still there today. You're going to have resolutions within your crew. You're going to have problems within the job. You're going to have things pop up. You're going to have client issues. You're going to have issues within your company. It's going to pop up. So you got to know how to deal with these. And then finally, leadership, right? Field leaders with leadership skills will create a supportive and motivating work environment and bring accountability to their teams. Again, this is no different than what you're trying to do inside your company, but outside this often gets neglected. Leadership, you're not born, no one is really born with leadership skills. Some people have a tendency to try to take that leadership role, but these skills are absolutely to be taught and should be taught. So other ones is critical thinking, which is, if you cannot have a critical thinking skill, you will not succeed at this position. Field leaders with critical thinking skills can develop a step-by-step process from identifying a problem to developing a solution. That's really what critical thinking is. You are able to identify what an issue is, and you're able to come up with a solution. Doesn't always mean that your solution is always going to rectify what the issue is, but you're able to work through it and come up with a satisfactory solution at some point. Whether it is, maybe it's sometimes you do have to kick this up the ladder. Priority and time management. Field leaders with time and priority management skills will boost productivity and efficiency. And later in this training here today, we're going to get into that about productivity and efficiency. But that's it. You have to have priority on that, and understanding all these and be able to react and handle and lead and manage your time, because your labor is your time. Ability to work with multiple generations of workforce. So currently we talk about this so much. There's 4 generations out there in the workforce pool. Being aware and able to work with this diversity will positively affect your company's recruiting, retention, and profitability. So as a crew leader, this is falling on your shoulders. Even if you are a baby boomer out there now running a crew, you're dealing with your own generation and 3 other ones. And if you're younger crew leader coming in, one of the, X or even millennial, or could be Z, you're going to have to learn how to deal with the other generations as well. So these are things you need to learn. Problem solving. You got to be good problem solving skills that are fundamentally necessary within the workplace. You have to be able to solve problems. So the crew leader. Roofing crew leaders today face a challenging future. As more experienced roofers continue retiring, crew leaders are going to need to be what? More hands-on with new hires. If you're a crew leader, I know you've seen this. The days of having everyone on your crew top-notch, knowing everything they need to do, and you never have to worry about a replacement because all the hires coming into the company are top-notch, fully trained journeyman, roofers. Not going to happen anymore. It's just not there. So you're going to invest more time to make sure employees understand their work assignments. So that's what your job is. And we're going to talk a little bit about building these crews up, but that's what you got to do. You got to make sure that on your crew, everyone knows what's expected, how to do it, and how to perform well. And you're looking for more ways to train and coach your people. You are a coach as a crew leader. So the training, that's your training, your skills, right? How to install the roof drain, how to put the roof down, how to run a screw gun. That's training. Coaching is how to perform, how to do your job well, how to work with others. That's what you got to teach. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I think it's a fortunate situation. The crew leader today is moving more into a coaching role than they are any other. So 6 essential skills every roofing crew leader needs. You got to learn to, I'm going to go through these and then I'm going to hit back. Learn to huddle their crew, personalize their message, being able to look ahead, not just the next move, but the ability to look 3 moves ahead. Construction math, you have to have an understanding of basics of that. Be proactive when it comes to decision making and the ability to learn technology. So what I mean by huddle, it's absolutely essential running a crew that you have a minimum of 2 huddles a day. You could have a third one at the end, but your morning huddle and your midday huddle are 2 of the most important that you can have. Morning day huddle, you need to cover what's expected of the crew, safety, all the things there, and where you need to be, what you need to get done that day, who's doing what, how are you going to execute. Your midday huddle, really, did you hit your goals so far for midday? Are you going to hit these goals in the afternoon? Do you need to readjust what is expected of the crew? Is everyone doing accepted? Now, when I'm talking about a huddle, these should not be 30-minute meetings. I got to be honest with you. When I ran huddles as a foreman and when I teach people to do that, this should be, honestly, you can knock this out in 5 to 10 minutes, absolutely tops. So you want it to be, right to the point and get in there, only what you need to do. This is not about discussing things that really are not essential. These are about getting down to the nitty-gritty bullet points and how to make sure you're safe. How are you going to execute safety? How are you going to execute? How many squares are we doing today? We tearing off? Who's doing what? Am I cleaning up? Are you getting the insulation? Are you putting it, whatever it may be? That's what comes through in these meetings. How are we hitting? Personalize their message. Effectively, a crew leader, you do not want to be this sheet printed out from your office that you're reading off, monotone every single meeting. This is what's expected. Safety looks good. We got to produce today. No, you want it to come from you. You want it to actually be what is pertinent on safety on that job in the morning. Ladder tied off. Do you have any unexpected openings in the roof? Is something happening? Another trade in your way? Are they digging around the building? All those things, whatever pertains to you, personalize your message. Want it to be from you, not coming from the company like a toolbox talk. That's not what these need to be. That's how your crew will respect and move forward along with you. Looking ahead, as a crew leader, you have got to master never calling in for a material you need in the afternoon because you did not think ahead the day before to know you were going to need something. And thinking ahead 24 hours is a great start, but you are a competent crew leader, 3 to 5 day lookout. I know when I came into the industry, we didn't have all the supervision we have or what we have today in skills and technology. You were basically, you didn't even have a phone on the roof. At that point, you had to go still use a payphone at a job site. But the important thing, why we learned that, right? I needed to know what I needed. Today's Monday. My week's laid out. I did that on Friday. Something changes. All right. Monday, I'm good for Tuesday, Wednesday. But Thursday now, we're ahead of schedule. I need more material, or I've got to change a delivery because we're behind due to weather. Those are the things you need to look ahead. Those type of things. Do I have enough labor force here to do what I'm doing? Maybe one day I need to borrow some labor force from another crew or bring another crew in because it's a difficult area to tear off. That's what I'm talking about. Looking ahead and planning. Construction math. You got to have a refresher course in this. You got to understand the basics of math. You need to be able to figure out squares. You need to understand dividing hours into what you're producing. You need to understand if you're given 1.2 labor hours to do something, what does that really mean, right? You got to understand the basic geometry and you got to understand basic math. That's how you figure it out. One of the things I used to always do was lay out during the day. I take spray paint up on the roof and I know how many squares I did and I measure it out, lay it out. I would know how many rolls it was going to take, whatever it was, that was all done on math. I know exactly how much I had to produce for the amount of people I had. So let's just say you normally have a 10-person crew, right? And all of a sudden now you have 9. Well, yeah, realistically, it'd be great to get what you're going to produce with 10, but you're probably not. So how much do you really need to produce with 9 to still be on track for your schedule? You've got to be able to calculate that on the fly. Because one thing about roofing, you never know who's going to show up every day, and it's always going to be that way. It always has been. And proactive decision-making. What happens if something pops up on the job? Hopefully your company's giving you guidelines. And if you're coming from that company standpoint of what your crew leaders' decisions can make and what really needs to be kicked up, you don't want someone calling you, oh, a drain bolt broke, stop the job, time out. I don't know what to do. Let me call and find out. Oh, I need a tap. Well, you should be carrying that stuff. You get my point. You've got to be able to make these decisions without worrying about someone else getting back to you on those. And you have to have absolute ability to learn technology. This, of course, is getting easier and easier over the last 10, 15 years because technology has become everyday way of life. This was a lot more difficult prior to that. So I think today we're probably moving in the right direction for crew leaders understanding and being able to use technology. Many hats that a crew leader reads or wears, right? They got responsibilities to their company and they got responsibilities to the crew. So they have dual roles here as a crew leader. So what are the responsibilities to company management, right? So when you're in this position as a crew leader, you got to translate what the managerial policies are of the company to the rest of your crew, right? What does that handbook really mean? What does that safety outline mean? What does all this training mean? What are policies of this company? And make sure everyone on your crew understands what's expected, what they need to do, how they work within the guidelines. And you got to maintain safety standards. Companies have safety standards, but OSHA standards, companies go above and beyond sometimes. You got to know what those standards are, and you got to make sure that you're getting that to your crew so they understand what's going on. Maintain the highest standard of quality. Absolutely. I mean, really, how does it go? It goes safety, it goes quality, and it goes production, right? If you don't have safety, nothing else really matters because you're going to have a disaster. If you don't have quality, it doesn't matter how fast you put something down, you're probably going to redo it. So that's usually a good order. So you want to make sure you maintain that highest standard of quality and everything's being put down in accordance to the specifications that you're bound to by whatever the job is. And you got to achieve required production on time. Your company bids a job, they've accepted it, whatever the deal is, they're going to give you X amount of labor hours, man days, whatever that may be that your company works on. However, you've come up with that process, you've got X amount of production time to get that done. It's your job to achieve that. If production is not being met, which believe me happens way more often than it should, you got to formulate new methods to increase the productivity efficiency, right? Now, not all the time, if you got a bad estimate, something was missed, you're never going to be able to make it off. But so you got to look at this is your job, and we got some examples later to see how you look at this. But your job is to make as much money as you can on that job for your company by the controlled process of production. So if you have something that's not on schedule, that was thrown at you, that wasn't missed, what are you going to do? Can you pick up some labor hours during, by doing something differently, more efficiency in the crew? You got to look at this stuff and keep material waste to a minimum. You have to, right? You got to find out what was figured. Usually, sometimes it's depending on the material, 5%, 10%, 15. It really depends on the job, what you're going to do. But I've seen jobs where crew leaders have stood by and watched partial rolls of TPO get thrown in the dumpster when they can absolutely be used for flashing or starter rolls. Same way with built up modified, it all fits in. So then you have responsibilities to your crew, right? So provide sufficient work instruction. You cannot expect these goals to be met if you cannot transcribe down and communicate in a level that your crew can understand what needs to be done. Correct methods for performing daily operations. What are we doing today? How do we do this? You've got to get that out there. You got to get your crew in sync. Maintain satisfactory working condition, cleanliness, and safety. Again, garbage on the roof, trip hazard, garbage on the roof, drain clogging, flood, all this comes in. You got to make sure you're overseeing and this is all being handled. Maintain discipline. You have to maintain discipline. There still can be fights. There still can be arguments. There's a lot of things that go on. So that's part of your job. Promote teamwork and lead and inspire the crew. You've got to work together as a team. You can, I see this a lot with crew leaders where they may not like someone on their crew, so they kind of isolate them over, and 3 people get along, a couple don't. You got these multiple factions, never going to work. You got to work as a team. Your job is to lead and inspire them and give them the motivation to work together as one cohesive unit. Represent the crew workers to management. This happens all the time. A lot of times the people out there on the roof don't feel comfortable going directly into HR or going to talk to another supervisor about a personal issue or something, time off. They're going to go to their foreman crew leader first, and they're going to discuss this with them, and they kind of want that person to be that liaison or maybe even go with them. It happens. So you got to understand that from both the management side and the crew leader side, you're going to be that advocate. Encourage suggestions and give credit where it is due, right? You've got to want to get suggestions back from the people that are working on your crew of maybe better ways, more efficient ways. If somebody's doing something every day, this goes back to the old adage, if you want to improve on a manufacturing line, you walk out on the manufacturing floor and ask the people running the machines or the assembly line how to do it better. And always give credit. As a crew leader, you should be giving credit when someone pats you on the back. It tells you what a great job you're doing. That's when you give the credit back to your crew. They deserve it. They're the ones doing it. You're leading them, but a true leader never accepts the credit. They always give it back to the people that are on their team and making it happen every day. And you got to be impartial. You cannot have favorites. This is hard. This is human nature, but you have got to be impartial and listen to what the issues are and what's coming out of the crew and make your decisions based upon fact and not anything other than that. Assign the right worker to perform each task of roof installation. Again, not everybody wants to sweep all day. Not everybody wants to clean up around the dumpster or whatever that may be. If that is the talent level, you got to work with your team and get people up to, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later. But your job is to make sure if you have somebody that is slow as heck on a screw gun, don't have them on a screw gun. If you got somebody else that's fast on a screw gun and they're cleaning up, right? You got to know who does what the best and get people in those positions. Because again, you've got to improve on production every day. So dive into empowering, right? So how do you empower? So if you're a crew leader or wannabe crew leader listening to this is what you would want to expect of your company. If you're on the management side, this is what you want to lead out with to your people, right? Treat them like frontline leaders. If you expect them, right? They're often treated much like regular employees. I've seen this all the time with crew leaders and foremen. They're not brought in for their own meetings. They're not talked to. They're not brought in with opinions. You got to empower them to act like managers and leaders, and it allows your company to react quickly to changes in real time. They're going to be your advocate if you treat them and put them in that position. You got to include them in meetings, right? How many times do you have a handoff meeting and it's not your foreman, your crew leaders are never in it? Sometimes it happens by the way they're running jobs. You got to do that, but you want that feedback. Have a meeting where they bring them in, talk to them, find out what's going on. Have them meet with the estimators now and then. Have everybody interact so their opinions are heard. You're gonna learn a lot, and you got to actively listen. So when I was COO, this is of roofing companies. This is what I always like to do, right? You got to listen besides the surveys, you can do those, but I always like to get that human feedback. I would meet with my foreman, alternate how many I would meet with on different bases so I could hear from it. Very slow to open up at first because they always thought there was another motive to it. But once they realized that I was there to really listen to what could be improved in the company, and if there was anything we could change and enact. Not every idea is a great idea, but the point is you don't knock somebody down for that. If you can't do something, you can at least say to them, hey, thank you for bringing that up. That's not really going to work the way we're geared right now, but we really appreciate it. That was a great idea. Let's see what else you can come up with. And then you're going to get a golden one sometimes, and that's what you want to do. Get it out there. So treat them the way you want to be treated and get them into that leadership role and away from just being a babysitter watching a gang of roofers try to put the roof down. Creating an engaged team, right? You want to be engaged. The formula for employee retention coaches your employee performance and continuous leadership cycle. I'm only talking about at the crew level now. Now, this is not the company level. This is at the crew level. So let's look at developing a team, right? This works. Hard to understand at first, hard to get people on board with it. It's a little bit easier to understand than it is to get people on board. But you will have certain crew leaders that can be great mentors and actually be your team developers, which will allow you to have to hire less raw recruits. And I'll explain how that works. So the first thing you got to do in a crew, right? Any kind of team, a team is a crew, you got to form it, which means you got to put it together. So you got your crew leader, you got somebody who's going to act as your next in command, and then you've got however many people on there that you normally work with in your crew size. So what happens once you get them all together? It's a very stormy cycle. I don't care who it is. They got to understand each other. They got to they're learning each other's habits, what they do, people's skill levels, who's lazy, who's not lazy, right? All this has got to come out. So once you get past that, you get into more of a normalization cycle. That's where everybody understands who they are, what to expect, who may be late, who may be early, who you can count on, who's going to check the tie-in every night, right? I'm just giving you examples, but this is the way it is. I now know, well, I'm a crew member. I'm not a crew leader at this point, but I know what everyone's capabilities are in my crew, what they're going to expect out of me, and what I'm going to expect out of them. Now you're normal. Now you're ready. Now you're a crew, right? You're good. You're ready to go. You've worked through the hard points. Now you start performing. What happens is now you're going to pull ahead of most every other crew in the company, and you're going to be what everyone working on a crew level and a crew leader wants to be, is that number one crew. You want to be the most money-making, best performing, safest, producing quality crew there is. And then what happens with this one we're talking about, that when we have that mentoring model, now it's time to split this crew up. Now, people, this is where they have the hardest time. Like, why would I do that? This is the only crew producer, because now your coaching foreman, crew leader, has had time to develop that lead person to become the next foreman and basically replace them on another crew. Now, somebody under them will be brought over from that crew to be the future lead person, which you'll identify this before this happens. This isn't something you wake up with. And sometimes this moves very quickly. Sometimes it may take 6 months or more to a year. Sometimes it can happen in 90 days. It depends on the coaching and mentoring and the quality of the crew to start with. So now you're going to say this was a 6-person crew. So you're pulling your lead off, and you're pulling one person off to become that person's lead. So that's 2. So besides the foreman, now you have 3. So maybe you want to take one more person off of this and move them over. And then that crew is only bringing in 2 new raw recruits. So what's happening to the coaching, mentoring crew leader here? He's bringing in new people, keep 1 or 2, maybe his next possible right-hand person, and start to build this again, right? It may take a little longer on a second time, but what's happening? Now, instead of trying to hire a crew from somewhere, or somebody coming in and saying, I'm a foreman, I've got a crew, and then you hire them and you find out they're really not worth a whole lot. It happens a lot in our industry, or depending totally on subcontracted labor, which can be good, but it also has its own defaults. You're now building within your cycle. This happens. You'll go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. So is it going to happen in 1 year? No. But the point is, if you're in business, what happens if you can go from a 4-crew shop to a 10-crew shop over a 5 to 7 year period? That's pretty good. That's real good. And you got everybody now humming as a quality crew. And then when people leave, which they do, but you'll find they leave less when they know there's that opportunity to develop and become that next crew leader, that next lead person. If people know there's movement for growth in the field level, and also then what happens to your crew leaders? Do they know there's field movement up to become a superintendent, a project manager? That's for another day, but you get where I'm going. That's how you keep your team rolling. So one thing you want to do, which is not done very well in our industry, is you should be educating. So we've talked about building that crew. Now we're going to talk about little basics here. Your crew leader should understand the cost impacts on a company's profitability, right? They need to know what's the cost of doing business as a roofing contractor. What are hidden financial burdens and the importance of support staff? So I know you're probably, well, what do you mean? Well, what I'm getting to is they should understand what it actually costs to put that roof down, how much money you're going to make to a point. I'm not saying you got to go and say, this is my profit level, but I'm going to give you an example on this. But an educated crew leader to understand the finances of our industry is going to produce at a lot higher profitable level. So the importance of cost awareness, right? So what happens? So do they understand that each dollar spent is going to impact the profitability of a company? You would think so, but if you're not training them and giving them some financial awareness, most people don't. The difference between project profit and a company's overall profitability, there's a huge difference. A company is profitable based on a pool of projects coming in, right? A pool of resources. What is happening on a crew level is you're a crew leader. They're going to understand how they run their job, as their own profit center, which then contributes to that overall profitability. And then we've got direct costs versus indirect costs. And you're like, nah, they don't need to know that. Yes, they do. Honestly, when I've worked over the years with crew leaders and foremen through the years, when we get to this example, it's amazing. I'm going to talk about a couple things, but when they understand what a direct cost is and understand what an indirect cost is, it makes a huge difference. Because why? Direct cost is what they control on that project. They don't control indirect costs, but they should understand what those costs are, because most people in the field, until they're educated, believe if a company is selling a job for $10,000, the company's making $10,000. They know there's some cost, but in their mind, that's all they focus on. Well, it's a $100,000 job. You're doing all right. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. But if you explain to them what goes into that process, you've got educated crew leaders. So break it down, right? List for them. What is a list of direct costs? They're going to have material costs, which they do control to a point through waste and all the other things. Field labor, absolutely, they control that. That is within their realm. Subcontractors. So I'm not talking about, you could have labor subcontractors mingled in and your crew leader may be in charge of that, or you might be working with a carpentry subcontractor, a lightweight subcontractor, crane, whatever that may be. They got to understand those charges go against their job, and other factors that go in there, porta johns, other equipment rentals. Explain how, they're going to really appreciate the fact that you've done this. They may think they know it, but they don't really know it till they're taught correctly. And then break down what the indirect costs are, right? The importance of overhead costs. List labor overhead. What is it? I don't know. What is overhead? I don't know. I don't know what you'd really consider overhead. Well, owners of the company, your project managers, your superintendents, they're overhead. They are part of your job that you don't really see on a day-to-day basis, but that is a cost of our company every time we do a project that we have to account for. And then talk to them about a little bit of operational costs. What goes into running your company, right? These are just some simple examples. Loan interest, building leases, phones, supplies. Say, look, every time you do a job, a portion of what we consider our overall gross profit goes to keep the lights on in this company, so that they understand that if they go over their budget, that is shrinking this pool that's required to keep the company healthy and keep it moving forward. So, right. And then this is one too, hidden champions. I will tell you right now, this works both ways. You can have admin staffing companies that don't recognize the importance of what happens in the field, because honestly, everyone other than it is installing a roof, and I can put it in a simple term, it's really a scorekeeper. Regardless, we're making sure things are happening, but we're not physically there. making it happen, right? We're not grabbing that ball and running for the touchdown. We're watching it or coming up with the play or that. So recognizing support staff. So you want to be able to have them recognize the support staff and the importance they do, right? They have critical roles. They're overhead. You know, you got estimators, you've got admin people, you've got payroll, you've got HR. The list goes on and on and on. Answering the phone, the front desk. Yes, they're overhead, but we don't want the field and their crew leaders to think that your overhead is a cost because you just like them and they're just there. They have a critical role to keep that business going, similar to what the critical role is in the field. Regardless, you want to have that respect back and forth. So financial insights. So understanding of overhead costs, right? Knowing the money needed to operate, and understand the difference between markup and profit, and what do most field leaders and employees really think before they're being educated. So you're really looking at this to say, well, this sounds like something I'd be more worried about with my estimating team or my project management team to teach them. No, I'm telling you, this pays off in gold when your crew leader becomes not only a leader of the crew, but a financial leader of his or her project. But they have to understand it. They can't control the overhead, and they don't need to get that in deep depth into it. It's not like when we did our estimating class and you got to account for it. But the point is, it's great to know they understand that if they run over, overhead runs with it. Like, so what happens if I'm a crew leader and you gave me 10 days to do a job and I do it in 15? Okay, so ran over. I know you still made money. What's the big deal? Well, the big deal is now you've got 5 extra days of overhead and operating expenses that charge to that job, because and I'm not saying direct job cost charging. What I'm saying is you're paying for it because the job ran over. Now, what happens if I bring my job in 7 days instead of 10? Well, I just saved 3 days of that overhead and expenses on my profit center, right? Again, we're not looking at this as the big picture. We want our crew leaders to understand how their profit centers affect the other profit centers combined to create the overall company. So they need to understand these things. And it absolutely, what is the difference between markup and profit? And again, I'm not getting into this like I would with an estimator, but they think everything's profit. If they look at a budget you give them and it has your labor and your materials and it has your bare cost, and my budget is $80,000 and you sold this job for $150,000. Wow, you're really doing great because all that's profit. Well, no, it's not. What is the overhead? And it helps if you can show them some examples of this. And we got one here that really works well. So let's just say you want to train them on this, right? You have a company that sells $10 million a year, and its overhead equals 20% of each dollar sold. So the company has an overhead rate of $20 or 20%. So the reason why I'm saying this is I don't really recommend that you rip out your financials from a company, nor as a crew leader would you expect that to happen. But this is a great example to understand it, because that's really all you need to do at this level is understand what happens, right? So you want to remember that overhead, again, we talked about, is an operational cost, right? And is not any of the expenses associated with installing your roof on a project that is considered direct costs. So again, this is not what you're controlling. This is not material, not labor, not equipment, right? So let's look at it simple, right? We're looking at a sample roofing company that does the 10 million. For every dollar, we're going to look at $1, because if I throw a dollar out on there, this makes it easier to understand. I'm telling you that for every dollar, roughly you are in charge of 75 cents. That's what you control. So if you run over, you're going to get maybe go to 80 cents. If you run under, you get to 70 or 65, whatever that may be. But you control 3/4 of that job in this example. Now, we already told you that our company overhead is 20%, which basically is 20 cents of every dollar sold. Okay. So if I've given you in my estimated cost as a company, 75 cents of that's yours, and you bring it in 100% on budget, you're going to end up at 75 cents spent for every dollar in sale. And we then subtract out the 20 cents. That leaves, right, before taxes and any kind of performance bonuses, for crew leader bonuses, whatever the company has, profit sharing, that leaves us a nickel. So now when you're looking at this, So, and I'm not making this stuff up. As a crew leader, I want you to understand this. So now I'm telling you, every dollar sold, you now understand that the company's keeping a nickel before it gives its portion to Uncle Sam or back into the company for operating, bonuses or whatever that may be. So now you kind of see it, right? You're not making 95 cents on every dollar sold and the company's putting the money in the pocket. It just doesn't happen that way. Now, a company's goal is to not end up with that nickel. Maybe they end up with 10 cents by being more efficient, right? Or 15 cents or 20 cents, because that's better for everybody. It goes back in. But this is a great example because I can tell you as a crew leader, the industry average, when it's all said and done throughout different size companies, 5 cents is not that much off the industry overall average in the last 25 years of financial study for every dollar sold. Companies are better. There are companies that are worse. So when you average them out, losing companies, very profitable. We're going to use this for our example. So when you understand this, now you understand how important, because look at that, out of every dollar, out of that 10 million sold, you're controlling 75% of it. So that's how important it is that you know what these other costs are. Because you can see if you run over and you hit 80%, you're at zero. Company's not making anything. You go to 85, the company's paying somebody to do that job a nickel. So every dollar sold, the company's paying 5 cents to do it. So you want to keep these in mind when you're really laying out your work and how you're understanding the budgets. So I get this all the time. I used to do this. I'd lay the dollar down and I'd ask the whole room full of, whether they were crew leaders or that, how much do you think the company's making off of this dollar? Well, some of them would say the full dollar. And then you'd have people that did understand the basics and they say, well, you're making 50 cents off every dollar, whatever that may be. So you're going to get that all over the chart in your company, but there's nothing wrong with having a meeting and bringing at a safety meeting, the entire company sitting in on this and taking the time to throw this example up and show them the honest way that actually it works, right? They're going to understand it better. So every dollar in sales will cost 75 cents that we just went over. And then you can use this. You can take a screenshot. This is recorded. You can take this and put it in your own presentation and actually use this to explain it the same way that I did for your crews. So improving job efficiencies, right? So once we get that down, so during the estimating process and at the start of a project, roofing contractors must examine each job to find areas where they might reduce labor hours through workflow efficiencies, right? So this is being done even before it's handed off to you. So the following are some examples a crew leader can use to improve job efficiencies. So once it gets to you, that's where your experience and your knowledge and your industry know comes in to actually make all this work. Because a lot of times, and it happens more than you think, that what the office thinks is the best efficiency flow may not necessarily be, because they're not there like you are every day seeing what needs to happen. So what are your important things? Your crew communication. We talked about this earlier, right? If you cannot communicate well with your crew and you got to make sure you have all the information you need from your office and company, estimating, project manager, whatever it may be, to do your job. If you're missing something, you got to speak up. You have got to speak up and get that information. You cannot be expected to succeed and properly communicate that down the line if you don't have what you need. Make sure there's a good handoff process in place in your company to get you what you need. You control the workflow tasks, regardless what the scope of work says or the work scope. You know what works best, right? If you've got an area roof that makes better sense to start on than what may have been anticipated, as long as you can prove that concept out and you're saving labor hours and improving on the efficiency of that job, by all means, that's the way to go. Use your experience. Don't go against what other people are telling you, but let them know why you have the better idea and prove that theory out to them and say, this is why. Staging of materials. I've seen this so much over the years where too much is stocked in the area or it's in the wrong area, or I got to send people all the way down to the right side of the roof to get the insulation, but the screws are all the way down the left side and the membrane is over to the north. So properly stage it with what you need. The best way to do this is pre-planning prior to it hitting a job. Staging a material is a lot more than just getting it up onto the roof and forgetting about it. That will save you more labor hours, increase the efficiency flow of the job almost more than anything else. And and that also includes whether you're bringing it up on a daily basis due to the job conditions with a lull or a hoist or a crane or something working on a high rise. Know what you need for each day and have it staged accordingly. Do not move materials or spend 2 days moving materials because you can't install roof because it was put in the wrong place to begin with. So again, proper staging matters. Then we got quality control. So what happens when quality control goes out the door? You will end up reinstalling something that was previously installed because it is incorrect. It is either not installed to the specifications or it is poorly installed and will not pass inspection. Remember, your goal at the end of the job is zero punch and zero manufacturer's problems on their inspection list, getting a 10, right? That's your goal. Does it always happen? No. It doesn't always happen, but the closer you come to hitting that goal every time, the better off you are. So you've got to make sure you can't have eyes all places at all times, that you have your people under you that are capable of watching as everything's being installed. Make sure the screw pattern is right. Make sure the insulation adhesive is right. Make sure the coating's going down correctly. Adhesive, whatever it may be. Make sure we're not cheating on our lines, right? For our overlaps, for our seams, whatever, cold welds. Endless amount of things you're responsible for, but you get that down, it's done right. It's easier to do it right the first time, even if it takes a little bit longer than it is to redo. Because let's say you got to take an extra 10%, but it's going to be right. I'm not saying you're running over budget 10%, but your mindset of what you can get done is going to be 10% slower. You're still either going to come in or at budget or under budget. Now you got to redo it. Well, guess what? You just doubled it. If it took you 8 hours to do something the first time, it's probably going to take you 16 to tear it off and redo it. So think about those things. It matters. So production, remember this. Production is absolutely the heartbeat of profit. I will tell you right now, we'll go through some examples. When a job is estimated, what does it consist of? It consists of material, equipment, labor, whether it's subcontracted or raw hours. And what do you got other than that? Then it's responsibility of the estimating team to make sure the overhead's accounted for, make sure they're at whatever the company set for the sales profit. You can't control that. Once you get to the overhead being estimated, once you get to that, you have no control over that. That you understand it now, but you can't change it. Now, what you are expected to do is that again, construction math comes in. If I'm telling you, I'm an estimator and I gave you this job and I'm telling you it's 110 square tear off, you go out, I mean, you should measure it yourself, right? Why? What if it's 115 or 120? What if there's another, well, what about that building over there? It's not, I'm not saying it's always going to be off. We're going to hope everything comes out to you really well, right? But your job to verify that it is right. If they tell you it's a 100 square job, do you have 100 squares of proper material? Do you have enough for waste? Do you account for tie-ins? Is that all accounted for in your scope that you're given from the team, right? Now, you want to look at the hours. We're going to go through the example in a minute, but you're going to look at the hours that you're given, whether it is, some companies do it, hey, you've got a 10-person crew, you've got 10 days to do it, whatever that is. But what happens, I said, if somebody's missing, you got to understand what happens and what changes. So you still got to look at it on your labor hours in comparison to your crew size. I mean, and let's say you're a crew leader and you got a subcontractor and you're telling me now you're sitting on this today and say, well, you know what? They're paying my sub crew by the square, however they're doing it. It really doesn't matter to me. Well, again, it does, because what happens? A couple things. One, the overhead's going to go out over. Your job's not going to be as profitable. There's going to be less money for the company and you at the end. And also, what happens when that sub pulls off and quality control wasn't there and it's got to be redone? Guess what? You're going to fix it, or you're going to be giving people from your own company to fix it, because 99% of the time, and this is from my own personal experience, most subcontractors do not come back and finish up what they weren't made to do in the first place. They're moving on to the next job, and it might be on to your next job. There's still nobody wants to pull them off. So think about those things, right? So let's look at that. We already said it's the heartbeat. So let's take a look at roofing contractor's chance of making a profit. Let's assume on this job, our contractor that you're going to be working for in this job project has 1,000 hours of labor in it, and it takes exactly 1,000 hours to complete it. The only profit made is what was left over when all overhead costs are subtracted. So let's go back to our example we covered before. We made a nickel. That's what the company was going to make. We made a nickel. Great. You can't be faulted for that. You brought it in on time. But now, let's say you took the time to go through your communications, you went through your workflows, you've done everything right. You've picked up 100 hours on this job. So now you picked up 100 hours plus the markup of those 100 hours, the company overhead and all that. That usually is where companies will set that aside in a nice incentive bonus for the crew and the crew leaders, and maybe even the estimating team. There's something to work with. You get it? That's what there's something now to work with. You've taken a job, instead of making a nickel, for every dollar, you're making 25 cents now on every dollar you save. That's what that 100 hours can do. So in the real world, if a project were to use precisely the amount of hours for which it was bid and the materials were done exactly as estimated, the contractor's only really going to make a small profit. Most contractors, the whole goal is to estimate it as accurately as possible, but by being accurate, the goal is to be able to figure out more efficient ways of getting it done through experience and so on. So you want to look at that. That's your job. Always try to beat budget. Production is the number one variable that can increase or decrease profitability on any project you run. That's number one. Again, if the estimator has done their job, your material is going to be where it needs to be. You've got the right amount of equipment, but you control the production output, good or bad. So as a crew leader, you cannot change whether or not something was left out, like we talked about on the estimate. Building missed. I've had that running crews, missed buildings. And my job was then take it and try to make up as much of that as I could to limit it, right? So you can always affect the productivity of your crew. It's more common than any of us would like to admit in the industry to find out only after a project starts that something has been missed or left out of the estimate. I teach a lot of estimating courses, and I've worked with estimators and all the teams throughout my entire career. It happens, okay? More than we want to admit to. So again, this is a bad situation, but it doesn't have to be a death sentence for the project or your company. A good crew leader who plans well and runs an efficient crew is going to be able to ensure that the job that's going to lose money because of that situation, but it's kept at a minimum. So let's just say, example of this, you got a job, wasn't estimated correctly. Let's just use that as our example. And now, if you did exactly without changing anything, we know this was missed, we're going to lose $35,000 on this job as a company. We know that. We already told you that. I'm going to come out and tell you, if we can't find a way to make this better, we're going out of pocket $35,000. You've got this plan. You know you can pick up something, but you can't make money, right? We got to be realistic. Too much was missed. But instead of losing $35,000, the way you run this job and pick it up, now we're only going to lose 10. So the company's out of pocket. So I get this a lot, especially when I'm working with the incentive plans and companies that are on this and working with crew leaders that have been set up on this. They're like, oh, this is a garbage job. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to lose. I'm not going to get any credit. No, I will tell you, a really good company is going to work with you on that and not penalize you for losing money. And you're probably going to get something put into your, extra into your pool for that job. It may not be as good as a job that you had a fair shot at and brought in even better, but you should never be penalized for that. And you're going to be looked upon as the hero of your company. I guarantee you will. That's how you elevate yourself up to that number one position. You got to be the guy they count on when something's rough or bad and bring it in and make it happen. And that's within your control if you're trained correctly. For everybody on here today or listening to this, we're coming up with a whole new 4 series for next year. It'll be on a different set of topics. So we're going to keep it going. I enjoy doing these quarterly training with you guys.